How many people have played the first video game ever created? You're probably wondering, well, I'm not sure. What is the first video game? Anyways, some people have debated on what the first video game is, but the first video game was actually Tennis for Two. Well, I'm sure many of us didn't play the first video game because it came out in October 1958, but there have been some iterations of perhaps an app or a system throughout the years. Unless, luckily, maybe one of us were old enough to play it at an arcade. Yes, it was quite a invention. Although it might not be relevant to some people in the world, many billions of people in the world, and about 164 millions of adults in the United States, have played video games. That's about the half of the whole current population. Just as much as the amount of consumers to video games there has been, video games has evolved to accommodate practically any consumer's desire. Today I will talk about some of the most impactful moments in history on how video games have evolved throughout the years, from the first big video games arcades to developments of consoles and finally how video games are now. The most prominent and earliest space of video games became known would be arcade machines. The golden age of video games, also known as the rise of video arcades, this is the time when video games became more accessible to the public. The 1980s was the age where you could find an arcade machine from gas stations to restaurants to laundromats or like places dedicated for arcade machines. Some notable games would be Street Fighter, Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and many more would revolutionize the video game genre. One of the big selling points would be the amount of money to play games, as we most normally know it for just $1. For playing the best at your capabilities to make a high score, because that would be the most important thing that people liked. Arcade machines, of course, had a limit on their capabilities to appease their consumers, as companies started to figure out to start having video games accessible at home. In an article found on museumofplay.org, published in 2013, written by Jeremy Sorcer, an oversaturated market for arcade games improved home video game consoles and rekindled anxieties about the relationship between arcades and juvenile delinquencies, among other things, all contributed to the decline of video arcades by the end of the 20th century. This, of course, meant the decline of arcade machines, but a new age for video games and home consoles where they became the next development for video game history, and boy did it sell. This does not mean that arcade games are gone forever, as you may still see some in places like Dave & Buster's. The next biggest installments of video games would be home consoles, that is the new innovative way to play video games at home with many games in just one console. The first console ever made was actually made during the golden age of video games. It was called Odyssey, and it was released in North America in September 1972. In an article on ComputerMuseumOfAmerica.org published on June 22, 2020 by Ben Lewis states, the system was developed by Rolf Beer, a German-American engineer who created the ping-pong-style gameplay that the Odyssey offered. This is a big moment as it inspired Nolan Bushnell from Atari to assign Alan Alcorn to create a game, and ended up being one of the most famous games released, Pong. Atari was the first company to innovate with home consoles, but many companies throughout the years followed, like Sega and Nintendo. The main thing that followed after the preliminary creations of home consoles was the console wars. It started with Nintendo making the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, as the game that mainly immense popularity was Super Mario Bros., which was made in 1985. The main two companies that had a feud for the top was Sega and Nintendo. After 4 years, Sega released the Sega Genesis, but after 1 year, Nintendo followed with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Sega didn't back down as they announced to the audience perhaps the Nintendo system was more based for children, and then instead of the Sega Genesis would focus on adults. The most prominent companies for gaming in the last few years have been Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, with all these systems being sold out upon release. The most current systems are Nintendo Switch, Xbox 360 by Microsoft, and the PlayStation 5 by Sony. These systems have been sold with millions to even billions of units sold worldwide. Games have become very resilient that people would even think they're watching a movie. Graphics have advanced immensely, and even new games that bring nostalgia are innovated with how they play out. The console wars are in a way still current, as these three companies have been competing for years, but still all have great success. The age of gaming has not dropped in years, as video games just keep gaining popularity, and studies show that it will continue to be like this throughout the years. The current pandemic has even increased video game sales exponentially, as an article QZ.com published on September 16, written by Adam Epstein, an entertainment reporter, states all of this has meant soaring profits over video game companies, including Nintendo, which reported 1.4 billion in profits in the second quarter, 5 times more than it made in the same period in 2019. This is an example of one company's rise in sales once quarantine had started. With the limitations of going outside, video games have shown to still prosper in troubling times, and how people have found the need to entertain themselves in these troubling days. Even though video game graphics and consoles have evolved in all these years, the interest for it has evolved exponentially, as more and more consumers are coming to get even the new PS5 and Xbox Series X. Video games will never stop evolving, even with the new age of starting to have video games in virtual reality. Video games will continue to prosper in the coming generations. Video games will continue to evolve each day to have practically the whole world involved. It has become one of the most prominent forms of entertainment and continue to do so. From the beginning of arcade machines to the home console wars to the final next-gen consoles, video games will continue to be a big part of the futures. The next time you think of playing a mobile game or just seeing an ad on the new upcoming PS5, just remember that video games have come a long way and will not go anywhere to generations to come.